So we're just finishing chapter 7 now. So what we saw is that I don't have a good translation in English for ma'alos, excellences, the valuable qualities are of two types, intellectual and character. And in order to have prophecy at all, the prophet must have all of the intellectual excellence, and most important of character excellence, but not all, because he points out there are a number of great people who were prophets who had certain character failures. And the differences of levels of prophets is the number or importance of the character failures that they have. And no one had perfect character. And then he said Moshe Rabbeinu has one barrier, and it's transparent, which leaves room for there being some character failure. And although the Rambam doesn't mention it, I mentioned to you that Chazal said that Moshe Rabbeinu was guilty of anger. I don't know if the Rambam had it in mind or didn't have it in mind. And then he says, don't let it be surprising to you that character failures could determine the relative rank of prophecy, because we have on record a number of cases where character failure prevented prophecy altogether. So you see that character failure goes together with reducing the capacity for prophecy. Now he wants to introduce at least a short discussion of the way in which Moshe Rabbeinu was unique. And although it doesn't answer all the questions I raised yesterday, it definitely helps. So he says, since Moshe Rabbeinu knew that there was no barrier he didn't remove. Why he's not counting the one transparent one, I don't know. But he says in other words, in terms of his character, does sound well. Those are the words say. There's no barrier he didn't remove, and if the barriers are character traits, we might make it sound as if his character is perfect. Yeah, he does say. And he perfected all of the excellence of character traits and of intellectual traits. He requested of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu essence of his existence, his identity. Since nothing stands in his way. So, in addition to the fact that these things are barriers between the people and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and even for the prophets, they determine different levels of prophecy, it's not yet obvious that when you take away all those barriers, then you can get everything. But that's what he's saying. When you take away all those barriers, then you can get everything. That means absolute understanding of the Creator. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, since I have removed all those barriers, therefore I'm asking to have absolute understanding of the Creator. And he said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hareini noas kvodecha, reveal to me your kavod. Now, the word kavod sometimes means honor or greatness, but the Rambam points out that sometimes it can be synonymous to his identity. It's not a quality of, it is synonymous with his identity. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu was asking for when he said, reveal to me your kavod. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu refused, and he refused by informing Moshe Rabbeinu that cannot happen as long as he is still associated with the physical. As a human being, you have a soul and a body, and they are in a certain association. And as long as they are associated with one another, it's not possible to have that. which, as I've said now a dozen times, means immediately that if you weren't associated with the physical, then you could have it. Because what's stopping you is the fact that your soul is associated with the physical. And therefore it follows immediately that in the world to come, where there's no body, no space, pause, body, then the soul alone could have it. And he says in the 8th chapter of the Laws of Tshuva that you do have it. So here he's talking about only the fact that being associated with the body makes it impossible for the soul, in this case the seichel, the intelligence of the soul, to grasp what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we have to ask, what's the barrier? Why is that a barrier? Why is that a problem? What is there in the relationship of the body and soul that would handicap the soul, in particular intelligence, from understanding something, anything? I'll try to explain that in a few minutes. That is to say, the Rambam says, since he's a person, and here he's using the word Adam for soul and body together. So that in itself could be expanded on. Because that's what the verse says. Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. That's how the Rambam reads the pasuk. Adam cannot see me and live. But if you're not what this pasuk calls Adam, which is a soul and a body together, if that's what you are, then you could see. Maybe we won't call you Adam anymore. Okay, so you lose that title. That's not a big deal. You have the soul by itself isn't Adam, but it can see. And now he describes this in detail. So you see that the only thing that stood between Moses and understanding the essence of the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one clear barrier, and that barrier is human intelligence, which isn't detached from body. So, how can I explain what it means? That, in other words, this type of barrier is different from the other barriers. The other barriers introduce a translucency or opacity in the vision. This doesn't do that. There's an impossibility because it's associated with the chomer, but it isn't that kind of barrier. It's transparent and still there's something you can't see. Now, I want to try to use two analogies here, one from the Pri Tzadik and one is my own, to perhaps explain this. And I don't know anywhere the Rambam writes any more detail about this. The idea that you have a barrier which is translucent, which transmits some light but not all light, and will dim the image or distort the image in certain ways. The Pri Tzadik's parable for this is: imagine that it's nighttime and you're standing in a room which is illuminated, and you're looking out a window to the street where there are street lights, and you can see outside also. But you won't only see outside, because part of what you will see, one second. Part of what you will see is reflection from inside, because the thickness of the glass reflects some of the light from inside to your eye. So when you look at the window pane, you will see some reflections of things in the room, and also some things beyond the window pane that are out on the street. You can try it. When you can see it there already. You see the reflection, and if there were light outside, you'd see some things outside also. There it's dark. So, now imagine that you're not looking at the window at an angle. Suppose you're looking directly at the window and out to the street. Okay, so if you're going to see something that's inside the room reflected in the glass, what are you going to see? You're going to see your reflection. Says the Pri Tzadik, that's the problem. You're getting in the way. Isn't that unbelievably brilliant? Isn't that brilliant? You're getting in the way. There's too much of you in the window pane. And because of that, you can't see clearly what's on the other side of the window pane. Your own image is competing with what you would see through the window pane. So, Moshe Rabbeinu says, in my window pane, there's nothing of me. I have wiped myself out of the window pane entirely. I'm not clouding the vision. I'm not standing in the way. I'm not distorting the vision. That's what the Rambam could possibly mean when he says he destroyed all the intervening, partially opaque barriers which lead to the reduction of the vision and the distortion that other prophets have. And let me point out that if there's a reduction of vision or distortion, that does not imply that the other prophets make mistakes. That is not implied. Because when you have reduction or distortion of vision, if you know where the reduction and distortion are, you can discount them and not use that part of the vision to draw conclusions. So you don't have to make any mistakes. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose you have a black and white photograph. So the skin of a person in a black and white photograph is gray. Just like everything in the black and white photograph is gray, or black or white. You don't draw a conclusion, well, this person had gray skin. You say, the gray there isn't the way, we're not getting the color. So the fact that the medium that you're using dims or distorts the picture doesn't mean you have to make a mistake. You just have to discount. If you know where the dimming and distortion is, you don't take that into account when you draw a conclusion. I could see he was standing up, but I didn't see what the color of his skin was. But it will dim and distort your vision. So that's what the other prophets had, and dimmed and distorted to a certain extent, and that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have. But then there's another way in which the vision might be less than perfect. And that might be that the eye of the person or the mind of the person isn't prepared for the vision. Not that there's something blocking the light rays getting to him, but there's something in him that can't respond correctly to the light rays. So, there is a passage in the Morah, in the guide, where the Rambam says that pikuach einayim means understanding. It doesn't refer to vision, that is to say vision as opposed to blindness, first to understanding. And he brings a proof. It took me a long time to understand this proof. Hagar is expelled from the house of Abraham, she and Yishmael, and she has a container of water with her. They're going through the midbar, the wilderness, and they use up the water, and she abandons Yishmael because she has no hope, and she places herself a distance away and starts to cry. So Kodesh Baruch Hu comes to her and says, don't cry, don't worry, I'm with you, you're not going to die. I've heard the voice of Yishmael. Kodesh Baruch Hu says, not your voice, voice of Yishmael. Okay, it's another story. Mm-hmm. And then it says, Vayifkach hazeineha, Kodesh Baruch Hu was pokeach her eyes, and she saw the well. She saw the be'er, the spring of water. So I thought, how could the Rambam use that as a proof that pikuach einayim means understanding? Here she saw it with her eyes. Before she didn't see it with her eyes. He's using this as a proof that pikuach einayim means understanding and not vision as opposed to blindness. Eventually, I think I figured it out. Let's describe what was going on before he was pokeach her eyes and afterwards. Is it that there was a sandstorm in the way? Is it that there were trees covering the spring that she couldn't see? No, the difference was in her eyes. Well, what was the difference? Did she have something blocking her retina? Was half her optic nerve not functioning? Where was the failure? The failure was she didn't understand what she saw. All the features were there, all the colors in all the places, all the oppositions and occlusions of this color and that shape were there. She just didn't understand what she saw. which happens to people. You don't notice what you're seeing. It's not that there was something interfering with the pixels, with the photons, stimulating the retina and carrying the information to the brain. The information wasn't interpreted correctly. So the Rambam is completely right. What Hakadosh Baruch Hu did was give her an ability to understand what she saw. That color there is spring water. You saw it maybe as light glinting on rock. No, it's spring water. So maybe what the problem here is that although there's no barrier reducing the content of the vision reaching the eyes, there's something in the eyes or in the mind of the viewer which doesn't take it in. The more I'm saying this, the more I'm becoming convinced that maybe it's true. And now the idea is that because it's connected to the soul's connected to the material, that's what stops him from being able to take it in. Now, why would that be? So we spoke about this. We spoke about this at the end of the first chapter. The Rambam's description of the soul is that the one single soul of the human being directs all of the functions of the body and the extra functions that it has on its own. The soul directs growth and directs digestion, nutrition, and sensation, and action, which are all animal functions. All of that is directed by the soul. And then there's the intellect, the applied intellect and act and pure intellect and all the rest of it, which are also part of the soul, but it's all part of the same soul. So if you ask, where is that soul focused? What is it applying itself to? What are its foci? What are its interests, so to speak? It has a lot on its plate. That the heart is beating is part of what the soul is doing. That the skin is perspiring is part of what the soul is doing. That the body's breathing is part of what the soul is doing. So maybe there's too much occupying the soul because of its connection to the physical. That's the problem. Not just that fingernails get in the way. It's that the soul is preoccupied preoccupied with monitoring and managing the affairs of the body. And maybe it takes the entire intention of the soul to the presence of the Creator to understand the Creator. So now, of course, there are two ways to say it. Either when in the world to come where you don't have a body, so those parts of the soul which normally are monitoring the body aren't functioning, and then the rest is left free. All the powers of the soul are invested in the rest. Or possibly, you could say something much more subtle, which I can't work out at the moment, and that is that all those things which were focused on the material could also be focused on the divine. After all, as I remind people who come from the East, mud can't be all bad because the Creator creates mud also. So don't tell me you have to detach from the physical in order to reach the divine. Excuse me, God's invested in the mud also. If you want to be like God, then you have to care about mud. You can't be detached from the physical. That's in this world. According to Rambam, in the next world, the situation is different. You pass the process of caring about the mud, but in this world, to go off to a mountaintop and meditate and just detach yourself from the physical as much as possible, if you have an ambition to be as much like the divine as possible, then you can't turn your back on the physical, because Gottleib Baruch Hu didn't turn his back on the physical. Okay, so now that may be the one clear masach. You see, the Rambam saying, again, I'm worried that I'm projecting too much of my own thoughts and too much of my modern perspective into the Rambam, which could very well be. And probably there'll be people out there who will write me emails and will explain to you where I'm wrong, what the true pshat is. But here the idea is that the between him and the thing he's looking at, there's no distorting feature. But he's not prepared to grasp what he sees appropriately. And that's because his mind is connected to the body, and in the next world it won't be connected to the body that way. Or maybe that's a pshat in Rambam. Did you have a question?
Does that mean Moshe Rabbeinu is focused on physical things to higher than anybody else did? Or
See, we have to be very careful here. Maybe the way I said it left open the kind of ambiguity. I'm not talking about his conscious concern. I said his soul, for example, is directing the beating of his heart. That doesn't mean that Moshe Rabbeinu is thinking about the beating of his heart. It's that the soul directs growth of the body, the soul directs digestion and nutrition. The soul, according to the Rambam in chapter 1, is in charge of all of what the body does. That doesn't mean that he, Moshe Rabbeinu, as a person, is conscious of all that. Doesn't have to occupy his mind. But the soul is occupied. And the soul is one thing. Not many souls. Rambam's quite clear about that. It's only one thing, which has many capacities. Well, I think the way he puts it in the Mar Nevuchim, you have one thing with one principle, but it interacts with different things in different ways. His example, he's using both as an analogy to the soul, as an analogy to the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with the world. And his example is heat. Heat can make soft things hard, like meat, and can make hard things soft, like metal. Heat can cure or cook, or heat can incinerate. It depends on what it's applied to. That doesn't mean because heat does 10 different things, that there are 10 different things in heat, each with its own nature to do different thing. Heat is heat. The kinds of things you apply the heat to determine what the outcome will be. So the soul is the soul, whatever it is, but when it's associated with the body, then the growth of the body is one effect, and the perception is another effect, and digestion is another effect, and motion is another effect. They're all effects of what the soul does. In this, there's an example of this with the Kav and the Rishima, for those of you who know what that means. That being the case, the soul as a totality is now interacting with and affecting a wide range of the world, including all of the functions of the body. In the world to come, it won't have a body connected to it, so all of that power, energy, ability will be focused only on one thing, and that is perceiving Kodesh Baruch Hu. And then Kodesh Baruch Hu could be understood. So the failure here is not in the barriers to the image. The failure here is in the perceiver. That the perceiver is not in a condition where he can take in what is being presented to him. Again, this is my thought about how it might work. Mary, you have a question? No. Okay, fine. So now he goes on. He says, right. And now he asked the Kodesh Baruch Hu to see and perceive and understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence. Kodesh Baruch Hu responded to him. And he did good for him in that he gave him an ability to understand after his question more than he had before the question. So this isn't as if he just turned him away empty-handed. What he said was, what you're asking for, I can't give you. But something I can give you. And now he said the verse uses the words seeing the face for that absolute understanding that is impossible for him because of the fact that he's connected to the physical, and seeing my back as the lesser vision that he got. Now the question is, what does that communicate to us? God doesn't have a face, and God doesn't have a back, so these have to be a kind of poetical way of describing some difference in understanding, and the Rambam now gives us a description of the difference. And it's on the basis of an analogy with what happens when you see someone's face. When you see someone's face, you recognize him, and that way you relate to him as an individual, and barring, I'm saying, identical twins, you now know what he looks like, and you can identify him and distinguish him from any other person. That's what he calls seeing the face, which would mean understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu in such a way that you can absolutely distinguish HaKadosh Baruch Hu from everything else. Without any doubt. Whereas, if you see someone from the back, well, people have different heights and different postures and different proportions of the limbs, and that'll be pretty good. You see somebody from the back, you'll probably be able to distinguish him from 95% of the people on the planet, or 98% of the people on the planet, but there will be some people who, from the back, will look like this person, and you won't be able to make an absolute distinction. And that's what he didn't get. He got enough of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have a general understanding of what distinguishes HaKadosh Baruch Hu from other things, but not detailed and precise enough to make an absolute distinction. Now, I don't remember where I first heard this analogy, but Aristotle makes the point when he talks about definitions, and he talks about definitions that are conducted via accidental features of something versus definitions that are constructed via essential features of something. And it's quite ironic, the example that he gives, because he himself didn't know that you could prove his difference by features in the world. He just wasn't aware of some of those features. So what human being, he suggests two definitions. The one that would proceed via accidents is featherless biped. Walks on 2 feet, has no feathers. Well, it's not a dog. And it's not a pelican, because pelican has feathers. What is it that walks on 2 feet and has no feathers? Says Aristotle. It's a human being. But feathers and 2 feet aren't essential to a human being. It just happens that these features pick out human beings from non-human beings. The definition of a human being by his essential features, says the Rambam, is rational animal. Human being is a kind of animal, and he has reason. And that distinguishes the human being from all of the other animals, and perforce from the vegetation and the inanimate features of the world. And it also would distinguish the human being, from our point of view, from angels, because the angel doesn't have an animal body. So those are features that are essential to the human being. No animal, no human. No reason, no human. Whereas with feathers and with legs, it doesn't have to work. And of course, as all of you know, the featherless biped really doesn't work, because there are kangaroos, which are bipeds and have no feathers. But the last time I checked, they aren't human. So the definition in terms of accidents doesn't succeed, really, in picking out human beings, differentiating from everything else. That's the weakness of a definition by accidents, because it could be overcome. New things could be overcome, or just your ignorance could overcome it. Whereas when you define something by its essential features, then it's going to be an absolute definition. It's not going to be contradicted. So that's one way to explain what it means to see my back. Would mean to understand features that I have, but they aren't intrinsic enough or essential enough to necessarily distinguish HaKadosh Baruch Hu from everything else. They might do a job of distinguishing, but it would be by accident, not by essential nature. I guess one of the contrasts that you could put to it is creation. Creation is a so to speak, an action that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu engaged in. It didn't change his nature. It didn't become something different. Had there never been a creation, had Kodesh Baruch Hu just continued to exist in splendid isolation, it wouldn't have changed his nature. So, in that sense, it's an accident, not something that had to happen. There's a long story behind that. Made it sound strange to you, but there's a long story, both in the Kabbalistic and the philosophical literature. At any rate, this is the example of what he got, what he didn't get, and that's only because it was attached to a body, for which I'm offering a description. Since the Chachamim, the sages of the Talmudic period, knew that these two types of deficiencies serve as barriers, that is to say, intellectual deficiencies and character deficiencies. They are what divide a man from a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and they do create levels of closeness, and they create the levels of the prophets, which, as we said, was only on the side of differences in character. Therefore, they said that when they saw great sages in their own time, they said of them, Ru'uyim shetishra elihem shchina k'Moshe Rabbeinu. It's worthy or appropriate that God's presence should rest upon them like Moshe Rabbeinu, like Moses. Okay, now, even on general terms, you could be a little surprised. Isn't Moshe Rabbeinu unique? But then the Rambam immediately says, of course, you, the reader, won't make the mistake of thinking that I just equated them with Moses, would you? Gee, I don't know. I mean, didn't the Talmud just say that they would be like Moshe Rabbeinu? So why is it obvious to me that I wouldn't equate them? But that's what he says. Lo ye'alei in hadimyon. It won't escape you what it means in this case of the comparison. For they, the sages, compared these great people to him, not equated them to him. Well, I don't know, reading the words. It says ke, which means like, but like can include identity, and like can include similarity. The word like doesn't necessarily push you away from equality, absolute equality, and yet he says that. Now I noticed that bringing the footnotes here, a whole literature, Moses' prophecy was absolutely unique. The Rambam says it in several places. It's one of his 13 principles of Jewish belief that Jewish commitment that we spoke about at the beginning of this series of lectures. So there's a certain struggle to understand what he could possibly mean here. So I want to suggest, I came up with this when I was preparing for this year. I'll try this out on scholars when I have a chance. Listen very carefully to the words and see if you can't hear an ambiguity in the Talmudic words. These people are worthy that the Spirit of God should rest upon them like Moses. Do you hear an ambiguity here? Yeah.
If the Spirit of God rests on them, then they must be worthy.
I asked for an ambiguity. Ambiguity means the words could mean two different things. That's what ambiguity means, right? And I think that maybe there's a question here, which does the Talmud mean? Listen, I tried with my pronunciation to give you a hint where it is, right? Listen again. These people are worthy that Hashem's presence should rest upon them like Moses.
And what does it mean, like Moses?
Yes. What's the two possibilities?
Like what happened with Moses?
Or
Or like came upon, or Moses himself reached that place of worthiness?
Okay, I think you basically have it. We'd actually put into the words. How do the words that I said have two meanings? So when you say like Moses, what did the like Moses qualify?
Mm-hmm.
Because two things were said. One thing was they're worthy, and the second thing that was said was Hashem's presence to rest on them. Is it that Hashem's presence would rest upon them like Moses had Hashem's presence rest on him? That's one possibility. Or is it that they're worthy like he was worthy of having Hashem's presence rest upon him? But then when Hashem's presence rests upon him, the outcome won't be the same. It won't be the same resting. It won't be the same connection. It won't be the same prophecy. It's just that they are worthy like he was worthy. Not that the outcome would be like the outcome. The statement in the Talmud is really ambiguous. And I think those who are worried that Moses' prophecy is unique are reading it that the like Moses goes on, the Spirit of Hashem will rest upon him like it rested on Moses. But that's not the only way to read it. The other way to read it is, they'll be worthy like he was worthy of having Hashem's Spirit rest upon him. But when Hashem's Spirit rests upon him, the outcome will be very different.
Yes.
And that statement is perfectly okay.
Yes.
Because remember, to be worthy means to have all of the intellectual virtues. And there were other people who were chachamim, and he says to be a chacham means to have all the intellectual virtues. And to have most of the most important character virtues. Now, he did say, if I understood him correctly just a moment ago, that Moses perfected his character completely. But who says another person couldn't perfect his character completely? Nowhere is it said that Moses was unique in that way, nobody else could do that. Nowhere is it said that. So, could be that just as Moses prepared himself for prophecy by acquiring all of the intellectual and character virtues, someone else could also prepare himself for prophecy by acquiring all the intellectual and character virtues. And that's what the sages of those later generations said. This, after all, what do they see? Right? All they can see is what the person has done. And they say, this person has conquered all of the virtues, and therefore he's as worthy as Moses was worthy, that Hashem should communicate with him. But not commenting on that the quality of the communication would be the same, for sure not. Yeah.
So as I understand it, is that you can refine your character to be worthy of prophecy. Now, not at the same level as Moshe, but there's a certain threshold where now you have that divine presence rest upon you because you've refined your character. And so there's a hierarchy where Moshe is at the top, and you have other prophets who were worthy, not at the same level, but had crossed that threshold to be categorized as worthy.
What you're saying is probably correct, although I think there's some vagueness here that I'm not quite getting around. But the point here is this: just as you can have two people who are equally worthy, they've crossed the threshold and they're both worthy of prophecy and equally worthy of prophecy, and Kodesh Baruch Hu can give prophecy to one and not to the other. We said that. The fact that you're worthy doesn't dictate to the Creator what He'll do about it.
Oh, okay.
So, a person could be as worthy as Moshe Rabbeinu to be a prophet, but were Kodesh Baruch Hu to give him prophecy, He wouldn't give him the prophecy that He gave to Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah, okay.
Because He chose Moshe Rabbeinu.
I see.
Right.
Yeah.
That at least what he could mean here. There are other things that he says in the Mishnah Torah which carry the situation further, but okay. Okay, that's the background that he has here for the idea of prophecy. Now we begin chapter 8. Chapter 8 is quite long, and it has a lot of very important philosophical ideas in it. He calls this the nature of man from the beginning of his formation. So this is how a person grows up and how he develops. And in particular, he has a long section here on free will, which is one of the very fundamental issues of our of Jewish commitment. So, he says, it's not possible, logical, that a person, from the beginning of his existence, should have in his nature a virtue or excellence or a defect. Just as from the beginning of a person's formation, coming into existence, he should have in his nature to be a woodcarver or a weaver or have some other ability to be physically creative. A person not born as a sculptor, not born as an economist, and not born as a debater. These are things that you learn. These are things that you develop. These are skills that you develop. The same is true with character. So, for example, when you see newly born infants behave in different ways, one must not confuse that with character traits. They don't have character traits. We had our first two children. The first child just ate and slept. That's all. For months. Very easy child to have in the house. Just ate and slept. The second child was awake almost all the time. Not crying, not bothering, just aware. Looking around. Right? You don't see in later, the one was more inquisitive, the one was less inquisitive, the one was more interpersonal, the other less interpersonal. No. Baby is born with natural behaviors, but they don't become character traits. If you take a newborn baby and drop him and catch him, when you drop him, clutches. That doesn't mean he's secretive or he's hiding or just his muscles clutch. That's all. So character traits, says the Rambam, develop later. But it could be that as coming newly into existence, he does have in his nature a tendency to be affected by what goes on around him, and that impact have a certain type of reaction and effect on his development. And that's where you can have inborn differences. Not in possessing character traits, but in being affected by what you experience in the to develop character traits. For one thing, for certain children, certain types of behaviors are very difficult for them to perform and learn, and others are very easy. For example, you have someone who's so he has physical conditions here which we don't identify as the source of behavior and character traits. But for certain people, memory is very easy. And understanding ideas is very easy than for someone else. My children vary tremendously. I have one child who remembers before he was 2. I can't remember before I was 2, and most of my other children can't remember. He remembers, and he remembers well, and he has it in front of him. Why is that? I don't know. Just the way he developed, he has that memory. So then, with a good memory, that's a big aid to understanding things. So he's got now something which he developed through his experience, and then becomes something which he can use. But it's not that he wasn't born with a good memory. He was born with the ability to deform a good memory through the experiences that he has. I'll give you 2 examples of this now, and I'm going to quit for today. The Gemara in Eruvin says something very interesting. It says, there are certain things which, if the Torah had not taught us them, we would have learned it from our experience. For example, we would have learned privacy from a cat. You don't see cats performing the private functions of an animal, for whatever reason. Other animals you do, cats you don't. Now, think what that means. It means I'm looking at a cat, I'm looking at a dog. Dogs perform their functions in public, and cats don't. Why would I learn from the cat and not the dog? I mean, I'm seeing both of them. And if you're unfortunate enough to be from Australia, what about the sloth? The sloth sleeps 16 hours a day. Wow. Impressive, hey? Maybe, no! It says we would learn industry from the ant. The ant busy all the time. By the way, how many ants are there on the earth? The last headline I just saw, about 4 quadrillion. I think a quadrillion has 15 zeros. And there are 4 of them. Okay, but they're always busy. Did you ever see an ant lazing in the sun? You never saw it. So why is it that we see the ant and say, yeah, right side, yeah, go get him. There I go, right? And you see the sloth, you think, oh no. That's terrible. Why? Why not the other way around? Because we are predisposed to be affected by some of the things that we see in different ways. And that's what's sort of built in. What you do with it becomes something that you can control, but the effect is the same way. Now, Lahavdil, Noam Chomsky became famous for a lot of things, and one was for arguing that the vast majority of your grasp of language is dictated by the genes. You don't learn that. The amount of exposure you have to language could not possibly teach you by any learning technique that we know language. Language is far too subtle and far too complex and far too extensive. In particular, language has recursive rules which are potentially infinite. In the understanding of language is the ability to understand an infinity of different expressions. Tom is tall. Tom is very tall. Tom is very, very tall. Tom is very, very, very tall. Tom is very, 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 very tall. You understand all of them. No matter how many varies there are there, you understand it. You don't suddenly think we're talking about ice cream. You get it.
Yes.
From the beginning. A 5-year-old knows that. Nobody taught him recursion theory. Nobody taught him that. So he says, most of it, but of course, if you're never exposed to language, you won't talk.
Yeah.
Speaking isn't programmed in the genes. What's programmed in the genes is when subject to certain experiences, that clicks the developmental part of the brain to give you the structure of the language. We know that there are windows of development for the brain where if the stimuli come in at a certain time, that part of the brain will develop, and if it doesn't come in at that time, it won't develop or won't develop to the same extent. So it's triggered by experience, but a great deal of what you get at the end is what was pre-programmed to be triggered if you had that experience. And I think that's the model for what the Rambam is saying here. You're not born with character traits, but you're born to have character traits develop in you by the experiences that you have, and different people will have the impact of the same experience. It will be different on different people. They'll develop different character traits. And then when you get to be 5 or 10 or 13, when you start your responsible life, if you're a boy, then those character traits will be your starting point for making the decisions that you have to make. That's the first point that he makes here.